I never thought the foundation of my life would shake because of words spoken in a room I wasn't in. When I was in my 20s, there were no guarantees. I worked 3 jobs, none of them glamorous. I stacked shelves at a supermarket before dawn, hauled boxes at a warehouse at night, and repaired air conditioners on weekends. Every paycheck was split between survival and a dream that had no shape yet. My friends went on vacations, bought cars, got married. I poured my savings into a rented garage with a leaking roof, telling myself that one day it would matter. That garage became my first workshop. It was crude, drafty, barely lit, but it was mine. I slept there sometimes, rolled up in a sleeping bag on the floor, because I couldn't afford rent and workspace together. Every mistake cost me more than I could afford, but slowly, piece by piece, I learned. The first contract was small, then another and another. By the time a year passed, I had clients calling me by name. 2 years later, I had employees. The workshop became a company, and the company became stability. And stability became pride. That pride wasn't flashy. It didn't come from expensive suits or fast cars. It came from the hum of machines I had repaired with my own hands, from the contracts signed after nights of preparation, from the knowledge that no one had given it to me. It was earned, not inherited. That difference meant everything. When I met my wife, the business had already grown beyond survival. It wasn't yet secure, but it was steady enough to carry 2 lives. She brought with her a teenage son from her first marriage, a boy quiet and sharp-eyed, someone who looked at me not with hatred, but with distance. I didn't push myself into his life. I wasn't there to replace his father. I tried to give him what I could: stability, opportunities, the kind of security I had never known at his age. I bought him new clothes for school, gave him a space of his own, paid for trips I couldn't have imagined when I was younger. I thought, with time, he would see my efforts. But distance doesn't always close. Some walls aren't built from stone. They're built from silence. He rarely thanked me. He called me by my first name, never Dad. I told myself that was natural, that trust couldn't be forced. What I didn't know was that in the background, promises were being made without me. For years, my wife was his greatest defender. She wanted him to succeed, to finish college, to become someone she could be proud of. He hated studying. He drifted through classes, switching majors, skipping lectures. And to keep him motivated, she offered him a prize, my prize. She told him that once he graduated, he could take over the business. She dangled the company I had built as if it were a family heirloom, a carrot to keep him walking forward. She never told me, not once. I found out on the day of his graduation. We held a small celebration at home. I grilled steaks, we laughed, we cut cake. I wanted it to be a good day, a day where he felt the pride I once wished for myself. Afterward, he asked me to talk in private. I thought he wanted advice, maybe encouragement. Instead, he looked me in the eye and asked when he would start running the company. At first, I laughed, waiting for the punchline. But his face stayed serious, his eyes filled with expectation. He repeated the words as if they were obvious. He had finished school. Now the business was his. I asked what he meant, and he said the words that hollowed me out. Mom promised. I stood frozen. Mom promised? Those 2 words erased years of struggle, years of sacrifice. I confronted my wife later, and she admitted it with a shrug. She said she hadn't thought it mattered, that by the time he graduated, I'd be ready to step back anyway. She said it was just to motivate him. She said it like the blood and sweat I poured into the company were hers to barter, like I was just holding a seat for her son until he was ready to claim it. That night, I walked through the workshop long after everyone was gone. I touched the machines, the walls, the shelves, each one holding a memory of failure turned into survival. I remembered nights sleeping on the floor, mornings when I ate nothing but stale bread, days when I thought I wouldn't make it. And now, all of it was supposed to vanish under a promise I never made. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the voice of the person beside you in bed. The following days were a blur of tension. My stepson carried himself as though he were already in charge, talking about changes he would make, the way he would modernize things. My wife supported him, praising his vision, defending his claims. I became a stranger in my own house, watching them plan a future where I was absent. Every silence between us was heavier than shouting. The tension didn't stay inside the house. It followed me into the workshop, into the office where my name hung on the wall, into the meetings where my employees waited for direction. My stepson started showing up unannounced, strolling through the workshop with the confidence of someone who believed ownership was his by right. He asked questions in front of the staff, not out of curiosity, but out of authority. When would this process be updated? Why hadn't I invested in that machine? Why was a client handled a certain way? At first, my employees smiled politely, unsure how to respond, but I could see the unease in their eyes. They looked at me, waiting for confirmation that nothing had changed, and I gave it to them, but each time I did, the weight of betrayal grew heavier. One afternoon, I found him sitting at my desk, my chair, my paperwork, my computer. He looked up casually like it was the most natural thing in the world. He said he was just familiarizing himself with things, preparing for the role his mother had told him was his. My voice stayed calm, but inside I was trembling. I told him this wasn't his office, that he was welcome to learn, but not to assume. His jaw tightened, his eyes filled with contempt, and he walked out, slamming the door. That echo stayed in the room long after he left, like a warning that this was only the beginning.
When I confronted my wife again, she dismissed my anger. She said I was overreacting, that he was just eager, that I should be proud he wanted to continue what I had built. I asked her why she had promised something that wasn't hers to give. She looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. She said family came first, that I was selfish for clinging so tightly to the business. Selfish. The word cut deeper than any insult, because in her mouth, it meant that my sacrifices, my years of loneliness and risk, counted for nothing. At night, the house turned into a quiet battlefield. Meals were filled with silence, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. My wife glanced between us like a referee who had already picked a side. My stepson carried himself with smugness, making comments about what he would change when it's mine. Each word was a knife turned slowly, deliberately. I started staying later at the workshop, not just to avoid the house, but to remind myself of what was real. The hum of machines, the smell of oil, the piles of invoices. All of it was proof that what I had built existed, that it wasn't just an illusion waiting to be handed away. I would sit in the office long after dark, staring at the contracts, the papers with my name on them, needing the reassurance that at least on paper, I was still in control. But paper doesn't quiet betrayal. Paper doesn't silence the whispers in the kitchen when I wasn't in the room. One night, I heard them talking. I had come home late, and as I stepped inside, their voices carried from the kitchen. He was furious, saying I was stalling, that I was trying to cheat him out of what was his. And she was calming him, telling him to be patient, promising him again that it was only a matter of time. I stood in the hallway, listening to my wife promise my life's work away, the words like stones pressing down on my chest. She wasn't trying to protect me, she was trying to manage him, and I was just collateral. The next morning, he came to me demanding answers. He said he had waited long enough, that I needed to start preparing the transition. I told him plainly, there was no transition, no promise from me, no inheritance he was entitled to. His face twisted in anger I had never seen before. He shouted that I was a liar, that I had led him on, that I had ruined his future. He called me selfish again, accused me of caring more about money than about family. And then he stormed out, leaving me with the sound of my wife's silence echoing behind him. That silence was worse than the shouting. It meant she agreed, even if she didn't say it aloud. It meant I was no longer her partner, just the obstacle between her son and the life she wanted for him. And once you realize you are the obstacle in your own home, everything changes.
I started locking the office when I wasn't there, something I had never done before. I changed passwords, secured documents, made sure nothing could be altered without me knowing. It wasn't paranoia, it was necessity. I could no longer trust the people who'd once been closest to me. Trust, once cracked, doesn't repair. It only splinters further until all that's left are shards you cut yourself on. Each day felt like walking on a battlefield where no one fired bullets, but everyone aimed silently. My employees noticed the tension. They asked if everything was all right. I lied, said things were fine, but my voice betrayed me. Inside, nothing was fine. Inside, I was living in a house where loyalty was a currency I no longer owned. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with a slammed fist on the dinner table one evening, after another silent meal where knives scraped plates louder than words. My stepson stood, eyes burning with fury, and declared that he would not be cheated out of what was his. He said he had already spoken to a lawyer, that he had rights, that he would drag me into court if I didn't cooperate. My wife sat frozen beside him, her hands clasped, her face pale. She didn't deny his words. She didn't stop him. She just looked at me, silently asking me to give in. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I had spent months trying to protect the fragile illusion of family, swallowing anger to keep the peace, telling myself silence was survival. But watching him threaten me, in my own house, with her sitting there complicit, I understood that the family I thought I was protecting no longer existed. What sat across from me wasn't family. It was entitlement, greed, betrayal, wrapped in faces I once trusted. I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I stood, walked away from the table, and closed the door to my office at home. The sound of that door shutting was louder than any fight. It was the sound of choosing myself for the first time in years. The following days felt strangely clear. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped hoping for understanding. I poured myself fully into the company, into the people who had stood by me without conditions. I tightened policies, secured ownership documents, updated contracts. If they wanted to fight, they would find no cracks. But more than that, I accepted that the battle for my family was over. I had already lost. And sometimes, the only way to win is to stop fighting for something that was never really yours.
My wife tried to reason with me. She said I was making things worse by being stubborn. She said I could give him part of the company, a role, a share, anything to calm him. Her words felt like poison disguised as compromise. She wasn't asking for peace. She was asking me to surrender. And for the first time, I told her no without hesitation. I told her the business was mine, that no promise she made could change that I would not erase myself to appease her son. Her silence afterward was colder than anger. At the workshop, whispers spread. Employees noticed the tension. Some asked if her son was really taking over. I shook my head firmly, told them nothing was changing. But trust, once shaken, never fully returns, and I could feel the eyes on me, the questions unspoken. I doubled down, showing up earlier, staying later, proving with my presence that I wasn't going anywhere. The business had always been my lifeline, and now it became my fortress. The night it finally broke, I was leaving the workshop when I found him waiting outside. He stood by my car, arms crossed, face twisted with rage. He said if I didn't hand it over, he'd make sure I regretted it. He spoke of legal battles, of dragging my name through the mud, of ruining me. His voice shook with hatred, but all I felt was exhaustion. I told him calmly that if he wanted to fight, he should fight with lawyers, not threats. Then I got in my car and drove away, leaving him shouting in the dark. That drive home was one of the loneliest of my life. The streetlights blurred through the windshield, and for the first time, I realized that survival sometimes means letting go of what you thought was unshakable. I had fought to protect both my business and my family, but one of them was already gone. Betrayal had hollowed out the walls of my home, and no amount of forgiveness would rebuild them. Weeks later, papers were filed. Conversations happened through lawyers instead of mouths. The house grew emptier, quieter, until it was no longer mine. But the workshop remained. The company remained. I walked through it in the evenings, the machines humming, the air heavy with oil and effort, and I realized something important. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost those who never truly stood with me. And sometimes losing them is the only way to save yourself. This story doesn't end with reconciliation. There were no tearful apologies, no sudden changes of heart. It ends with survival. With a man standing in the ruins of promises he never made, holding on to the one thing he built with his own hands. It isn't a happy ending, but it is a true one. Because betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from across the dinner table. And when it does, the only choice left is to protect what is yours, even if it means standing alone.
And the months that followed, the echoes of that last fight didn't fade. Paperwork was signed, silence replaced conversation, and what had once been family became nothing more than a set of strangers bound by bad memories. I found myself waking early, sitting in the workshop long before the employees arrived, listening to the hum of the lights flicker on, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. It was lonely, but it was real. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering the first nights on that concrete floor when I thought I had nothing and still managed to build something. Back then, I believed the hardest battles would come from the outside: competition, clients, the economy. I never imagined the sharpest cuts would come from inside my own home. But scars don't only come from enemies. They also come from promises spoken by the people closest to you. Promises you never made but were expected to keep. People ask if I regret it, if I regret not handing the business over to keep the peace. The truth is, peace built on betrayal isn't peace at all. It's a slow erosion of self until nothing of you remains. Giving up the company wouldn't have healed us. It would have only confirmed that my work, my sacrifices, my very identity could be bargained away in whispers I was never part of. So I kept it. I stood alone. And yes, there are nights when the silence is heavy, when the weight of what was lost presses down. But standing in that workshop, surrounded by the hum of machines and the smell of effort, I know this: I still have myself. And sometimes that is the only thing worth saving. Because betrayal doesn't just steal from you, it asks you to erase yourself. And survival, real survival, is refusing to disappear.